Simon, welcome to this first edition of the Market People podcast series.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. Thank you for coming and joining us. It's also great to have you as a corporate member of LMF. We're thrilled to have you on board. I think when I look back over your career, you've had an amazing career in this particular domain. We're working for big organisations like Bupa and Rank and Cushman and Wakefield, so many, including, of course, Lloyd's of London.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to look at your background. You're also an accomplished author. You've written a great book, which I've read. I've got a copy here. This is really great book to read. And you know, now you are the founder and CEO of DataTick, a very interesting and progressive firm that we're getting to learn lots about. We're excited to do that. We're excited to be able to bring you inside the circle at LMF and be able to introduce you to our vast membership that we have in the London market. So today we're going to be talking about the exciting area of data and analytics and artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
This is something that we're talking about extensively at LMF. Nearly every group that we have, all of our practice groups, are talking about this particular topic. So although we have a designated data and analytics practice group, it's coming up on everything. So this is why we wanted to talk about this particular topic with you today. It's great to have you here. So what value do you think that data and analytics and AI brings to insurance, and in particular the specialty insurance market?
Well, first of all, thank you for the welcome. It's lovely to be part of things. I think I'm very excited. I know we've been to a couple of events already and appreciate what you bring to that market. So that's fantastic. I think when you say about data analytics being sort of critical to organisations, people talking about it, I think the reality is that everything everyone does contains data. And I think, I always see it in terms of, you're doing it, you need to get more value from it. But the starting point, I think, is very much about efficiency. And I think you kind of start off, I always have this, maturity model in my mind, that you start off doing the basics. And if you get the data right and you start sharing that information, you start, we all know that the specialty insurance market is about a chain of participants, from a client through to broker, through to insurers, reinsurers, everything else. And that data is passing backwards and forwards through to regulation. And it's complicated. And I think getting that efficiency is the starting point, because really, if you get it right, then people can share information. They can all do their roles properly. And I think that's the fundamental sort of point. If you get that right and you start storing the data, you start using it, and that's the thing that most people have been talking about. But it is really the starting point of the journey. And for me, that's a little bit frustrating. We'll come on to that later, that, there's so much more that you can do with it. Once you've got that, then you can start to do what I think is really critical, which is actually providing a much better service to your clients.
Yes.
And I think when you're doing that and you understand who the underlying clients are, and it could be, an underlying sort of organization that wants its, assets and everything else insured, but it could also be a broker if you're an underwriter, so understanding who that client is, I think, is really important, and providing the right level of service and insights to them helps them. So I think that's kind of the second thing, is you're able to do that. And I think the final thing is you're then able to start differentiating. When you've got that data and you've got the insights, when you act on them, you can start saying, well, we can improve our performance. Who is it we're insuring? And why are we insuring them? Who should we not be insuring? What advice could we give them in terms of how they can look at their whole kind of world and say, should we be managing our risks differently? And I think that's something that I think most people in the market understand, but they don't have the tools to do it. So eventually providing that advice, and that's something that other industries have done in the past. I think that's where we're going to get to.
Certainly what we're seeing and hearing on all of the practice groups is this environment where people see this coming. They see their job roles changing in some way. And we'll come on to that a little bit later on. But it's fascinating to see that people are recognizing the power of data.
Yeah.
They're also starting to see new products and tools that are enhancing their job role right now.
Yeah.
But then you apply the artificial intelligence on the top of that, and that creates a completely different, obviously, opportunity for these firms. And then in the insurance market, like in any market or any industry, you're seeing some firms that are more progressive with this, and some firms that perhaps are following and fast followers, and some at the back of the line, but probably will need to get there pretty quickly, because this does create, beyond doubt, a competitive advantage, doesn't it? To have this right, have this strategy right. So that's interesting, that your comments on the specialty insurance market in particular. So what are the top 3 things that insurance firms should be doing right now in this particular area?
I think the first thing is that there are so many things you can do with sort of, data analytics, and people want to get onto the shiny things of AI and starting to, do some really interesting things. But I think sorting out the basics is what you have to do. So people talk about message types and everything else, and I think that's a little bit of a red herring. I think when people focus on those things too much, there are so many different things that you can think about. Actually, sorting out your data and getting it ready is the single most important thing. So understanding what have you got, where it is, because whatever you do, you're going to need that, whether it be for market efficiency, for insights, for solving regulatory problems. So I think a lot of people have said, core data record, what should we do for that? And then hold off, or it could be a variety of different things. We know that the regulatory market place is changing significantly, and that the regulators will no longer accept an answer around something. They want to know the value of that data. They want to know the journey, the provenance of the data, and everything else. So if you don't sort out your quality of your data, the governance, how you store it and access it, you won't be able to solve those problems. And if you want to get insights, you want to start using AI, you need good data to do that. It's only as good as the quality of the data you have. So I think the reality is everyone needs to sort out their data, no matter, and that's kind of a basic lesson of don't wait, go sort out the basics, because you don't have to wait to find out whether something's going to happen. It is going to happen. It's happened in every other market, and therefore I would say don't hold off on that one. And I think we've seen a lot of people getting chief data officers and bringing people in to look at those things. And I think that's fundamental. So starting on that, and that creates an awareness of what you can do. The second thing is to then start thinking about, how you can use those services to drive value. And people often think about data as being, a cost and an activity. And I think that's really the wrong lens. I think we've learned from most organizations now that when you think about the value, it is about sort of how can you use it to drive more business? How can you use it to provide a better service? And I think having that lens is about having the right culture. So starting to think about what it can do for you and prepare those things, because changing a data culture, changing the way you do things, the business processes that you've got that use data, all of those things take several years to do. So I think start planning, preparing, and everything else will really help. And then finally, I think, you start doing those things, start implementing it and delivering. And I think you can do that around all the basic things of, regulation reporting. That gives you efficiency. So do some of those things. That shows you've delivered something. And then finally, you'll see how you can then use exactly the same data for getting insights to drive more value.
Interesting. So what about the area of legacy data? How much of a challenge is that for firms in the insurance market?
I think there's kind of legacy data and there's legacy systems and platforms.
Right.
So I think, and they're probably one and the same thing. Organizations that have acquired lots of systems. They've got data that's fragmented from those acquisitions and everything else. And organizations that have grown up and they kind of haven't quite got rid of the old platform and they've kept a new one and everything else. So what they have is that spaghetti of systems where you've got so much stored everywhere that when you're trying to get an insight, it's very difficult to do. If you, and for new incumbents, it's much easier because they put in a platform, that does something and immediately they can get some value from it. So I think the legacy data, the history from different places, it's an opportunity, because the more data you've got, especially around losses, history of losses and everything else, is really powerful when you're doing underwriting. As an example, the more you've got on that, the more value you've got. But if it's fragmented, it's really difficult to get that value out.
Yes.
So that's the real challenge. And then you start thinking about how you join data sets, the mastering of that data. So sorting out those fundamentals is critical. But yeah, the history is absolutely critical.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. So, what lessons can we learn from other industries?
Yeah, I think there's kind of several. The first one I would think about is what feels like one of the challenges is around the ownership of data. And there's been lots of debates around kind of who owns what data and who's responsible for providing data throughout that process, all the way from, sort of the original client through to broking, through to, what goes on the slip, the schedules of what people are looking to ensure, taxation challenges around that, and, finally through to providing sort of regulatory information to more than one regulator. So that fragmentation is probably the biggest challenge, and broking has been seen as kind of like, okay, so are the brokers, do they own the data? Should they do it? Should it be, the underwriters? And I think that's probably the wrong question. I think when everyone looks at the value,
yes,
they'll realize that they will get far more value from it. So I think there probably needs to be that understanding, and this is not something people are thinking about the efficiency of the market. They're not actually thinking about, when I've got it, what can I do? So if you look longer term, broking industry has probably been a great example. So stockbroking, investment banking, we've had hedge funds set up, we've had fund managers, all of whom are working in the same market and operating really well and efficiently with their clients. So I think that would be one example. The other example that hasn't got there yet is around real estate property, where they are further behind and they're struggling with these issues. But the ownership piece, I think, is the bit that's almost holding things back at times.
Very interesting. So what industries at the moment do you think are achieving the most from using data analytics and AI?
Yeah, I think I would start by saying financial services, but actually fintech.
Right.
So when you go from financial services, that feels a little bit old school. You can imagine you've got the big banks, whether they be retail banks, corporate banks, investment banks, and they were the traditional organizations, but actually they invested heavily in data, more than 20 years ago, and they felt that was absolutely critical to what they were doing. So Big Bang was really, the thing that kicked that off for them. And so since then, fintechs have kind of taken it to another level. They're all driven by AI. They're very much new business models and everything else. But the traditional firms are still there, still profitable.
Yes.
They're just very different approaches to doing things, different levels of service and everything else. So I think they've coexisted quite well.
Right.
People thought the big established firms would disappear. They haven't. They've just taken a little bit longer to adapt to the new tech and data and everything else. But the fintechs have a new role as well. What they've done is to make the market bigger.
Yeah.
And I think that's the bit that people kind of worry about, their roles, their jobs. Actually, it's created a bigger market and a much more dynamic market, and everyone's surviving in it. And I think that's the best example.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So looking ahead, so what will the data and analytics and AI landscape look like 5 years from now? I mean, it's so fast moving. You might not think so, but for someone who's in the industry, it's fast moving.
Yeah.
And underwriters that we speak to around our tables say to us they can see it moving at quite a fast pace, faster than they've seen things move in the past with other areas of technology or growth.
I think if we're looking forward 5 years, and I think it's quite good to do that and then reflect back, what do you need to do to get there? That's the way I would think about it. So in 5 years' time, I think you'd certainly see firms that are going out and they're talking to the ultimate client and giving them advice. So, if you are, thinking about, property insurance, and you go back to those organizations and say, actually, when we look at the way you manage the risk around your properties, we don't think you're doing it that well, and as a result, your premiums are higher.
Yes.
So providing those insights, giving advice, builds those relationships.
Yes.
I think people may be concerned about what the implications are, but the reality is the more you do that, the more people like you, the more business you're going to get, and the more you're trusted. So I think that's absolutely critical is understanding that. I think the second thing is around performance.
Okay.
So when you think about who you insure and why you insure them and what that matters based on your kind of, I suppose, the sort of goals of your organisation, because not every insurer is the same.
Yeah.
So it's thinking about what they want to do. So the performance around that is absolutely critical. And I think those two things combined mean that the market is more sustainable, probably an overused word, but the real use of sustainability is they'll be around in 10 years and 15 years as well.
Yes.
And they want to do that. But as long as the market's inefficient and new incumbents come in, if they're not getting onto those things, I think they'll miss out. So I think in 5 years' time, there will be new players in the market without doubt. We know that from other industries. But I think focusing on performance, understanding how they can do things better, and I think the organisations themselves, and I'm sure we'll get onto this, the people within them will be far more focused on what I think have become far more interesting jobs rather than rekeying. We know there's a lot of that going on. People understanding where to get things from. They're actually driving insights, doing exciting and productive things. And I think we've seen that in other industries. That will come, and I think people will enjoy that.
Yeah, well, actually, you've come on to the next question here, which is actually one of the things that people often raise around the table is, does this mean I won't have a job? So we had some underwriters around the table recently who were quite concerned that actually their jobs might be removed by, certainly by generative AI in particular, but the whole area. So there were other people around the table who said, well, actually, do you know that it's not going to be the case. This will actually enhance the job role, give them more insights and a better understanding of the risk. But we're seeing a lot of growth in the geospatial data area in particular. So is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I think first of all, if I were bold enough, I would say it's nonsense that roles will, disappear.
Yes.
So if you look back historically at all technology, and let's bundle data analytics and AI into that, the growth of roles around those has been exponential. The employment generated by those, and we look at kind of unemployment versus employment. Employment has grown substantially, so more jobs available. They're just different types of jobs.
Yes.
And so I think that's the first thing: is tech has never reduced employment ever. It's only ever grown the market. That's statistically in every country. That's just the way it's gone. So when people worry about the job, I think it's about having the right skills and engaging with it. And so when you do that, actually, there are more roles. It makes them more interesting. So for the role, you mentioned the role of an underwriter. And I think the reality there is that when you use something like AI will never be able to make all the decisions. It will never be able to do everything. It can deal with large data sets. It can deal with complex problems. But what it does is surface those to someone and say, can you please interpret this? Because I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
That's the end state.
That's
when you do that, and this was done with mortgage underwriting, all kinds of underwriting before, what it does is it automates what it can, and that may be about 70% of everything. The remaining 30%, it says, okay, I've got the problem. I don't know where to take this. And it requires an individual, first of all, to check what it's done to make sure it's sensible. So what's been processed automatically.
Yes.
You need someone to review that and to make sure it's done right. Then what you need is someone who can say, actually, how can I improve what it's doing?
Yes.
And that's a really important role. And that's quite a fun role because you're looking at something and say, oh, I can do better. And people love doing that sort of stuff. It's just human nature. And then the final thing, I think, is, where you're being asked to make decisions and interpret things, that's where you get insights around things.
Yeah.
So you're given large data sets, you're given some thoughts, and you can say, actually, I know how to interpret it. And you need humans to do that all the time. Definitely. So all you're doing is taking away the mundane and making it more interesting. But you'll never be able to get rid of underwriters ever.
No, I think that'd be reassuring to our members for sure. And that's what I think we concluded at our last meeting that we had.
Good.
So coming towards the end now, but what advice would you give anyone who's listening to this podcast today, who has starting to have a real interest in this topic, may not be a specialist in it, may not have had a lot of experience, but is interested in learning more about it, wants to get on the wagon, as it were, and really understand this topic? What would your advice be to them?
I think first of all, there's probably kind of 3 or 4 things, but I'd start with an open mind.
Yes.
Because I think, so people have different views on what they think, data analytics and AI are. So if you have an open mind, then actually you're more likely to learn about it. Then I would say, come along to some of your events, okay, when people are talking about those things. It's really good because you start to see the application of it. And I would always start with not what it is, but how do you apply it?
Yeah.
Because that then follows through to, okay, so how can I do that? So if you're looking at, and if people are talking about Chat GPT or whatever, yes, you can read up about it. It's not going to help you one dot. What you need to do is to say, okay, what could I do? How can I apply it? And when you start seeing those things, it becomes meaningful.
Yes.
So always start with what can I do with it and how I can do it, and start reading around it and start coming to events and start asking questions. There are plenty of people around, many people who've not used it, but there are people around who've used it, and start saying, what can I do? What have you done with it? Look at sort of case studies. I think they're fascinating to see how other industries have used, data and AI to do things. And say, okay, I can see that. And in relation to my job, if I did that, then I could do something equivalent. Then I think it's quite exciting, because the conversation you can have with your leadership and everything else is to say, I've got this great idea of how I think we can bring value doing it. That's quite empowering.
Yes.
That's what they need.
Yes.
So many of the leadership probably weren't around with these things. So for people who want to get into it, I think they would love people who came along and said, I've got some ideas and I think we can do it, but focused on business value, not on just let's do loads of stuff, which is what some people talk about.
Okay. And obviously, I advise anybody to have a look at your first book, and I know that you're busy thinking about your next one as well.
Yeah, that's shortly to be announced, but a slightly kind of more advanced thinking about the real differentiation you can get with data and AI, and that will kind of be something we'll be talking about soon.
Absolutely, great. We'll look forward to that. So when you're not doing all of this and you're not advising senior executives from all sorts of corporates around the country and around the world on this topic, what does Simon Asplen-Taylor like to do? Well, how do you shut off from all of this and get some downtime? I know it's difficult. We both run organisations and it's difficult to get any downtime, but when you do, what do you do?
Well, apart from data analytics, I mean, the business is for me quite exciting. I'm just going to put that to one side because that is what I do most of. But photography is one of those things that I love. I am a geek, and I will always be a geek. and I think one of the reasons that I like doing what I do is because I like understanding, I like discovering, and I think photography is good. I play tennis, I love doing that. So that's always good fun. It kind of gets you out there doing things. But probably top of the list would be sailing. I'm a very big sailor, a yacht master. I love sailing and getting out there, and I find that when the wind is in the sails, you just forget about everything, and that's great. Yeah. So love doing that.
It's amazing when we talk to people and find out the things that they do. People don't know. There's lots of people in the London market and the wider sort of ecosystem that have got amazing skill sets, and it's great to listen to those people and talk to them. Well, look, Simon, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us today. It's great to have you part of LMF, as I said earlier. We look forward to having you part of the whole body of LMF during the next 12 months. And we'll hear lots more from you and your colleagues over that time. But thank you for your time today.
Roger, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Right. Thank you.